Get on your knees, Captain, and maybe I'll let you keep those bars. Major Daniel Hayes shoved Olivia Bennett hard in the chest, sending her stumbling backward in front of 300 soldiers. He grabbed the front of her uniform, yanked her close, and spat the words into her face. You think a locked folder makes you a soldier? Prove it, right now, or crawl off my field and never wear that rank again. His fingers twisted the fabric until the seams strained. The whole formation went dead silent. And Olivia looked up at him, calm as still water, and quietly said, "Let go of me, sir, now, while you still can." If you love stories about respect, courage, and the quiet people who prove the whole world wrong, then take a moment right now to subscribe to this channel and stay with me all the way to the end, because this one changes everything in the final minutes. And drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Now let's begin. Fort Liberty woke up cold that morning. The kind of cold that gets into a soldier's bones and stays there through the first cup of coffee and halfway into the afternoon. 300 men and women stood in perfect rows on the training field, breath rising in little white clouds, boots planted in the half-frozen dirt. They had been standing there for 20 minutes already, and every one of them knew that when Major Daniel Hayes ran a morning formation, you did not move, you did not speak, and you did not under any circumstances look bored. Major Hayes walked the line slowly. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, even at 49 years old, with a gray crew cut and a face that looked like it had been carved out of the same hard ground they were all standing on. 26 years in the Army, 4 combat deployments, 2 Bronze Stars he never talked about, and 100 stories he told constantly. He had buried friends. He had carried wounded men on his back through places most of these young soldiers had only seen in movies. And he believed with everything in him that the Army was getting soft. He stopped in the middle of the field and turned to face them all. "You know what's wrong with this Army today," he said. His voice carried without a microphone. It always did. Too many leaders who've never bled. Too many officers who learned war out of a book. You give somebody a rank and a clean uniform, and suddenly they think they can lead men into a fight. But a rank doesn't stop a bullet, and a diploma won't drag your body out of a burning vehicle. A few of the older sergeants nodded. They'd heard this speech before. They agreed with most of it. That was the thing about Major Hayes. He wasn't wrong about everything. He was a hard man, but he was hard for reasons that had cost him something. And that made him dangerous, because when a man like that decides he's right, no facts in the world can turn him. That was the morning Captain Olivia Bennett had been at Fort Liberty for exactly 9 days. She stood near the front, spine straight, hands at her sides. 31 years old, not tall, not imposing. There was nothing about her that demanded attention. She had arrived with a single duffel bag, a laptop, and a folder of documents she kept locked in her office. In 9 days, she had barely spoken to anyone. She showed up early. She stayed late. She spent hours reading intelligence reports and staring at maps of the base while other officers went to lunch. When she did speak, it was quiet, precise, and short. She never told war stories. She never mentioned a medal. She never tried to make friends. And the soldiers had noticed. Whispers followed her everywhere. In the mess hall, in the hallways, in the barracks at night when the lights went down. You see, the new captain never says a word. Heard she came from some intel unit, never even seen combat. All theory, no fight. Watch first time things get real, she'll freeze. Nobody said it to her face. But soldiers are not blind, and neither was Olivia. She heard the silence that fell when she entered a room. She saw the way conversations stopped. She understood exactly what they thought of her. And she said nothing. Because Olivia Bennett had learned a long time ago that the loudest person in the room is almost never the strongest. She had learned it in a place she never talked about, at a cost she never described, and she carried that lesson the way you carry an old wound, quietly, always aware of it, never showing it to a soul. Major Hayes had noticed her too, and it bothered him. He couldn't say exactly why. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way she looked at the maps in the operations room, like she was reading a language nobody else could see. Maybe it was that she had never once tried to impress him, and in 26 years, everyone had always tried to impress him. But the more he watched Captain Bennett, the more he became convinced that she was exactly the thing he had been warning his soldiers about. A paper officer, book-smart, battle-blind, someone who would get good people killed the first time the theory met the truth. And Major Hayes was a man who believed problems should be exposed before they became disasters. So on that cold morning in front of 300 soldiers, he decided to expose her. "Captain Bennett," he said. The whole field went still. Olivia lifted her eyes. "Sir," front and center. She stepped out of the formation without hesitation and walked to the middle of the field. Her boots crunched on the frozen dirt. She stopped 6 feet from him, came to attention, and waited. Her face gave away nothing, not fear, not anger, not even curiosity, just calm attention, the way a person waits for a train they already know is coming. Major Hayes looked her up and down, and he let a small, cold smile appear at the corner of his mouth. "You've been here 9 days, he said loud enough for everyone. 9 days, and in 9 days I've watched you read a lot of reports. I've watched you stare at a lot of maps. I've watched you tell soldiers what to do." He paused. "But I haven't watched you do a single thing that proves you belong in front of them." "Sir," Olivia said, "just that, a steady acknowledgement. You tell these soldiers you can lead them." Hayes continued, raising his voice, now turning slightly so his words hit the whole formation. "You wear those bars, you give those orders. But leadership isn't a clipboard, Captain. Leadership is standing between your people and the thing that wants to kill them. So let me ask you a simple question in front of everyone. Can you actually survive against someone who fights, or is all of that in the folder you keep locked in your office?" The soldiers didn't breathe. This was different. This wasn't a speech about the army being soft. This was personal, and every one of them knew it. They had seen Major Hayes push soldiers before. They had seen him break people down in front of a crowd. But there was something in his voice this morning that had a target, and the target was standing perfectly still in the middle of the field, refusing to look afraid. Olivia held his eyes. "Sir," she said quietly, "may I speak freely?" "That's what I'm asking you to do, Captain." "Then I'd advise you respectfully to reconsider whatever you're about to do." A ripple of surprise went through the formation. A couple of the younger soldiers actually exchanged glances. Nobody talked to Major Hayes like that. Not calmly, not to his face, and certainly not on a morning when he was already looking for a reason. Hayes laughed. It was a real laugh, deep and genuine, and it made the hair stand up on the back of several necks. "Reconsider," he repeated. He shook his head slowly, still smiling. "You hear that? She's advising me." He turned back to her. "Is that a threat, Captain Bennett?" "No, sir." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't drop. It stayed exactly where it was. "It's the last warning I'm going to give you before you learn something in front of your soldiers that you should have already known." And just like that, the laughter died in his throat. Because there had been no fear in it, no bluff, no performance. She had said it the way a doctor tells you the results of a test, flat, certain, a little bit sad even, like she already knew how this ended and simply regretted that he was going to make her prove it. For 1/2 of 1 second, something flickered across Major Hayes' face. Doubt, the smallest, quietest sliver of doubt. And then his pride slammed the door on him. "Sergeant Reed," he called out, not taking his eyes off her. From the far side of the formation, a mountain of a man stepped forward. Staff Sergeant Marcus Reed, 6'3", 240 pounds, most of it built in the gym and tested in combat. He was the base's lead close quarters combat instructor. He had trained hundreds of soldiers in hand-to-hand. He had won more matches than anyone could count, and he had lost, by the whispered legend of the base, exactly none. When Reed walked into the training circle, grown men decided they suddenly needed to be somewhere else. "Sergeant Reed," Hayes said. "Step into the circle." Reed hesitated. Just for a moment. He looked at the captain, then at the major, and something on his face said he understood exactly what was being asked of him and didn't love it. But an order was an order. He walked to the training circle, marked in the dirt, and stepped inside. "Captain Bennett," Hayes said, and there was a new edge in his voice, now the edge of a man who is committed and cannot go back. "You say you can lead. Then show these soldiers you can survive. 1 round in the circle against Sergeant Reed. No rank, no paperwork. Just you and someone who actually fights." He spread his arms wide. "Unless, of course, you'd like to withdraw." The word hung in the air. Withdraw. Everyone understood what it meant. If she stepped back now, if she said this was inappropriate, if she pulled rank or called it unfair, she would be right. Completely legally, professionally right. And she would also be finished. Because these 300 soldiers would remember for the rest of their time at Fort Liberty that the quiet captain had backed down. The whispers would become a verdict. All theory, no fight. She would never lead a single one of them again. Not where it mattered. Olivia knew this. Everyone could see that she knew it. She looked at Major Hayes for a long moment. Then she looked at Sergeant Reed. And then she did something that made a strange chill run through the crowd. She started taking off her jacket. She folded it once neatly and set it down on the ground at the edge of the circle. She rolled her shoulders. She flexed her hands. And when she stepped into the circle to face a man who outweighed her by nearly 100 pounds, her expression had not changed at all. She was not tense. She was not braced. She looked, if anything, calmer than she had all morning, like a woman stepping into her own kitchen. Reed shifted his weight. He was a professional. He'd fought people who talked big and folded fast, and he'd fought people who were quiet and dangerous. He couldn't tell yet which one she was. That uncertainty made him cautious, and caution made him slow. "Captain," he said low, just for her, "I don't want to do this." "I know," she said just as low. "It's all right. He gave you an order. I'll go easy." Something moved at the corner of her mouth, almost a smile. Almost. "No," she said. "You won't, and that's fine." Major Hayes stood at the edge of the circle with his arms crossed, absolutely certain of what was about to happen. He had seen it a dozen times. The talker gets in the circle, the reality of a real fighter hits them, and they crumble. 2 seconds of panic, a takedown, a tap, a lesson learned. He was already composing the speech he would give afterward. He would help her up. He would say something like, "It takes courage just to step in, Captain, and now you understand the difference." He would be magnanimous in victory. That was the plan. "Begin," he said. "And here is where I have to slow down and tell you exactly what happened, because it happened faster than anyone watching could believe. And if I told it to you at the speed it occurred, you would miss it." Reed came forward. He didn't rush. He was too smart to rush. He moved the way a big trained man moves, controlled, balanced, closing the distance to grab and control her, to end it cleanly and gently the way he'd promised. He reached for her, and Olivia was not there. She hadn't stepped back. That's what fooled everyone, and it fooled Reed most of all. She had stepped in, toward him, to the soiree, into the exact space his own reaching arm had left open. His momentum, all that weight moving forward, suddenly had nothing to grab, and a body that big does not stop on a dime. He stumbled just slightly, just enough, and in that half second of imbalance, Olivia's hand found his wrist, her hip found his center, and she used every ounce of his own 240 pounds against him. Marcus Reed left his feet. The base's undefeated combat instructor went up over and down into the frozen dirt so hard the sound of it reached the back row of the formation. And before his brain had even caught up with the fact that he was on the ground, Olivia had already stepped back out of range, hands loose at her sides, breathing like she'd done nothing more strenuous than tie her shoe. Nobody made a sound. 300 soldiers stood in total, absolute ringing silence. Reed lay in the dirt for a moment, staring at the gray sky, and then he started to sit up, and something remarkable happened. He started to laugh, not a bitter laugh, not an embarrassed one. A stunned, delighted, disbelieving laugh, the laugh of a professional who has just seen something beautiful. "What," he said, holding up a hand as he got to his feet, "was that?" Olivia didn't answer him. She simply nodded once, a small gesture of respect, and turned to look at Major Hayes. And the thing about that moment, the thing that mattered more than the throw, was her face. Because there was no triumph in it. There was no gloating. She wasn't rubbing it in. She looked at the Major almost with regret, as if to say, "I warned you, and I take no pleasure in this." Major Hayes' smile was gone. "Luck," he said, but his voice had changed. It was quieter now, and quieter did not suit him. "You caught him leaning. It happens." Reed opened his mouth. Reed, to his enormous credit, was about to say, "Sir, that was not luck. I have never in my life seen a throw like that." But Major Hayes wasn't looking at Reed. He was looking at Olivia, and in his eyes was the particular fury of a man whose entire understanding of the world has just been threatened, and who has decided he would rather double down than be wrong. "Again," Hayes said. "Sir," Reed started. "Sit down, Sergeant." Hayes was already unbuttoning his own jacket. "I'll handle this myself." A murmur went through the crowd, and this time it could not be silence. This was no longer a lesson. This was no longer a training demonstration. A 49-year-old battalion officer was stepping into a hand-to-hand circle against a 31-year-old captain in front of 300 soldiers, because his pride could not survive what he had just seen. Every officer on that field knew this was a mistake. Every sergeant knew it. Even the youngest private in the back row knew it, and not one of them could stop it. Olivia looked at him for a long moment. "Sir," she said quietly, "please don't." "Are you refusing an order, Captain?" "No, sir." A breath. "I'm asking you not to give one." Noted. He stepped into the circle. He rolled his neck. He had been a hard, strong, capable soldier for 26 years, and part of him still believed that youth and technique were no match for experience and will. "Begin," he said. And Major Daniel Hayes learned 3 separate times over the next 90 seconds exactly how wrong he was. The first time he came in swinging all aggression and confidence, and she took his arm and turned it and set him gently in the dirt like a man laying down a heavy bag of feed. The second time angrier, now he came in harder, and she was even softer with him, redirecting, controlling, lowering him to the ground almost with courtesy and stepping back before he had even landed. The third time humiliation had made him wild, and wild is the easiest thing in the world for a calm person to defeat, and she barely seemed to move at all before he was down again. But here's what those 300 soldiers would talk about for the rest of their lives. Not that she won, not that she defeated a major 3 times in 90 seconds. What they talked about, what they told their families and their friends, and later their own soldiers, was what she did each time she won. Every single time she had him. Every single time she was in a position to hurt him, to lock a joint, to pin him, to make him tap in front of everyone, to complete his humiliation the way he had tried to complete hers. And every single time at the exact moment of her advantage, she let go. She released him. She stepped back, put her hands at her sides, and waited for him to get up. She never insulted him. She never mocked him. She never once looked at the crowd for approval. After the third time, Major Hayes stayed on his knees, in the dirt chest, heaving gray hair damp with sweat, despite the cold, and he looked up at her, and the look on his face was not anger anymore. It was something worse. It was the look of a man watching everything he believed about himself quietly rearrange in front of a crowd. And Olivia Bennett did the last thing anyone expected. She stepped back, she came to attention, and she raised her hand and saluted him. A crisp, correct, respectful salute. To the man who had just tried to humiliate her, to the man she had just defeated 3 times over. She held it waiting for him to return it, giving him in front of every soldier on that field the full dignity of his rank that he had refused to give her. "That's enough, sir," she said, gently. "That's enough." For a moment, Major Hayes couldn't move. He knelt there in the dirt, and every soldier watched him, and the silence was so complete you could hear the flag lines clanking against the pole at the edge of the field. And then slowly, painfully, he got to his feet. He looked at her salute. He looked at her steady, unhappy, respectful eyes. And something in him, something old and hard and certain, made a sound like ice beginning to break. He returned the salute because he had to, because in front of his soldiers there was nothing else to do. But his hand was not steady, and everyone saw it. "Dismissed," he said, his voice barely carried this time. "Everyone, dismissed." The formation broke apart in a low, buzzing wave of disbelief. 300 soldiers walked off that field carrying a story they would tell for the rest of their careers, and every one of them stole one last glance at the quiet captain who was already picking up her jacket, folding it over her arm, and walking calmly toward the operations building like nothing at all had happened. Sergeant Reed jogged to catch up with her. "Captain," he said. "Captain Bennett, wait." She stopped. He didn't quite know what to say. He was a proud man, and she had put him on his back in front of everyone, and yet what he felt wasn't shame. It was something closer to wonder. "That thing you did," he said, "the first move, when I came in, you didn't move away. You moved in, right into me. You committed your weight," she said simply. "The moment you decided to grab me, you told me where your balance was going to be. I just met it there." Reed shook his head slowly, where he said, "Did you learn to fight like that?" For the first time all morning, something changed in Olivia's face. Not much, a shadow, a door closing somewhere behind her eyes. "I didn't learn to fight," she said. "I learned to pay attention. The fighting is just what happens when other people don't." And she turned and walked into the building, and Marcus Reed stood there in the cold watching her go, absolutely certain he had just met the most dangerous person he had ever known, and completely unable to explain why he wasn't afraid of her, but glad, deeply glad that she was on his side. Major Hayes did not go back to his office right away. He walked. He walked the long way around the base, past the motor pool, in the barracks, in the empty parade ground, and he did not speak to a single person. Soldiers who saw him coming found reasons to be elsewhere. There was a look on his face they had never seen, and it frightened them more than his anger ever had, because Major Hayes without his certainty was like a building without its frame. 3 times. She had put him down 3 times, and 3 times she had let him up, and that was the part he could not get out of his head. Not the losing. He had lost before. Life had put him on his back plenty of times, but he had never lost to someone who refused to enjoy it. He had never lost to someone who saluted him afterward. In his entire career, he had believed that strength and mercy were opposites, that you were either the one holding the other person down or the one being held. And in 90 seconds, a 31-year-old captain had shown him a third thing, a thing he had no name for, a thing that looked like power and felt like grace, and it had cracked something loose in his chest that he could not put back. He didn't sleep that night, not really. Around 2 in the morning, he did something he almost never did. He got up and he went to his office and he opened his computer and he pulled up the personnel file of Captain Olivia Bennett. He told himself it was due diligence. He told himself a good commander needs to know his officers. But the truth he wasn't ready to admit even to himself was that he needed to understand her. He needed to know where a person like that comes from. He needed to find the thing that would make sense of the morning, that would let him go back to believing what he had always believed. He did not find it. He found almost nothing. Captain Olivia Bennett, age 31, commissioned, yes. Assigned to Fort Liberty, yes, current orders confirmed. And then, where a career should have been, where deployments and awards and evaluations and assignments should have stretched down the page, in the ordinary bureaucratic language of a soldier's life, there was almost nothing at all. Whole sections were sealed, not redacted the way sensitive material is usually blacked out. Sealed, locked at a level his clearance could not open. Assignment histories that showed only dates and no locations. Evaluation records that existed but could not be viewed. Award citations listed by number with no description attached. It was a career, clearly a real and substantial career, and someone had reached into it and closed it like a book and set it on a shelf too high for him to reach. And at the very bottom of the file, in the space where there should have been a supervisor's contact and assignment, history, a chain of command, there was a single line of text, refer to originating command, that was all. 4 words, no name, no number, no unit. Refer to originating command. Major Hayes sat back in his chair in the dark, and for a long time he didn't move. He had spent 26 years in the United States Army. He knew what sealed records meant. He knew what referred to originating command meant. It meant that whoever Captain Olivia Bennett really was, whatever she had really done, was above his pay grade, above his clearance, and very possibly above the pay grade of everyone on this base. It meant that the quiet woman he had dragged into a circle in front of 300 soldiers, the woman he had called a pretty face promoted to fill a quota, the woman he had tried to humiliate to make a point about the softness of the modern army, was someone the army itself had gone to considerable trouble to hide. He had challenged her, and he had not even known who he was challenging. The realization came over him slowly and then all at once, like cold water rising past your knees to your chest. He thought about the way she had looked at him before it started, that flat, certain, almost sorrowful look. I'd advise you respectfully to reconsider. It's the last warning I'm going to give you before you learn something in front of your soldiers that you should have already known. She hadn't been bluffing. She hadn't been posturing. She had been trying in the only way she could without saying too much to save him from himself. And he had laughed at her. Major Hayes closed the file. He did not close it in anger. That was the strange part, the part that would have surprised the soldiers who thought they knew him. He closed it in something much closer to shame, and shame was not a country Daniel Hayes had visited in a very long time. For most of his adult life, he had told himself a simple story. The world is dangerous, the story went, and danger doesn't care about your feelings, so a good leader has to be harder than the world. He had believed that story through 4 deployments. He had believed it through funerals. He had believed it every time he pushed a soldier past the point where they thought they could go and watched them come out the other side stronger and told himself, see, that's the job, that's love, that's leadership. And most of the time he hadn't been wrong. But somewhere in that hard, true story, A lie had grown quiet and patient, the way a crack grows in a foundation. The lie was that strength had a shape, and he knew what the shape was. The lie was that he could look at a person, a young officer, a quiet woman with a locked folder, and no war stories, and just know that they didn't have it. The lie was that mercy was weakness and calm was fear, and that the only real proof of a warrior was the willingness to dominate. And that morning in 90 seconds, a captain, half his age, had walked into a circle and shown him without a single insulting word that every part of that was wrong. She had not proven she was stronger than him. She had proven something worse, something he could not argue with, something he would be turning over in his mind for weeks. She had proven that she could have humiliated him and chose not to. And there is no version of strength more complete than the strength you decide not to use. He thought about the salute. He kept coming back to the salute. She had earned every right to walk away from him. She had earned the right to let him kneel there in the dirt and feel every second of it. Instead, she had come to attention and honored the rank he had dishonored. And she had said gently, "That's enough, sir. That's enough." The way you'd talk to a man you were trying to help down off a ledge. He had spent his whole life confusing that gentleness for weakness. And now here it was standing over him, deciding not to hurt him. And he understood, sitting alone in the dark, that he had never once in the 26 years been that strong. Major Hayes did not know that night everything that was coming. He did not know about the strange incidents that were already beginning to accumulate around the edges of Fort Liberty, the small wrong things that no one had connected yet. He did not know that in a matter of days the base would face a threat that none of his experience had prepared him to see, and that the only person capable of seeing it would be the very woman he had tried to break. He did not know that he was about to face the hardest decision of his career, or that the quiet captain carried a secret about 11 soldiers and a warning that came too late and a burden that explained everything about the way she moved through the world. He did not know any of that yet, but he knew this. He knew that when the sun came up, he was going to have to face 300 soldiers who had watched him fall, and he was going to have to face the captain he had wronged, and he was going to have to decide what kind of man he wanted to be for the years he had left. And for the first time in a very long time, Major Daniel Hayes was not certain he knew the answer. The morning came gray and cold again, the way mornings did at Fort Liberty in that season. But something had shifted overnight, and everyone felt it, though. No one could have put it into words. The soldiers moved a little differently. They talked a little quieter. When Captain Bennett walked across the yard toward the operations building, coffee in one hand folder under her arm, the whispers that had followed her for 9 days did not follow her anymore. Something else did. Something that looked from a distance almost like respect. Though it was tangled up with fear and confusion and 100 questions no one was brave enough to ask her. She noticed. Of course she noticed. Olivia Bennett noticed everything. That was, in the end, the whole secret of her, though none of them understood it yet. She had walked through the world her entire life as the person no one took seriously, and she had turned that into the greatest advantage a person can have, because the people who underestimate you will show you exactly who they are. She had learned to read a room the way other people read a page. She had learned to read a battlefield the same way. And she had learned at a cost she never spoke about that the most dangerous thing in the world is not the enemy you can see. It's the pattern that no one else is willing to believe. She reached the door of the operations building and she paused just for a moment with her hand on the cold metal handle, because she had already seen it. 3 days before Major Hayes dragged her into that circle, before any of this began, she had been sitting alone in the operations room at night, going through routine security logs that nobody else bothered to read carefully, and she had noticed something. A small thing, a wrong thing, an access attempt at a strange hour followed by another one 4 days later, at the same strange hour during the exact narrow window, when the base changed shifts and its attention was thinnest. 2 data points. Not enough to alarm anyone. Not enough to say out loud yet. But Olivia Bennett had spent her whole hidden career learning that catastrophes announce themselves quietly in patterns of 2 and 3 long before they arrive, and that the only people who catch them are the ones patient enough to be watching when no one thinks anything is happening. She had 2 data points. She was waiting for a third. She did not know yet what it would mean when she found it. She did not know that it would put hundreds of lives at risk, or that it would force the proudest man on the base to choose between his reputation and his soldiers, or that it would end with an apology she never asked for in front of the same 300 faces who had laughed at her name. She only knew that something was wrong at Fort Liberty, that almost no one was looking, and that once again, as had happened before, in a place she never talked about, she was going to be the only one who saw it coming. She opened the door and stepped inside, and down the hall in his office, Major Daniel Hayes sat with a cold cup of coffee and a personnel file he could not open, waiting for the courage to walk down that same hall and say the words he had spent his entire life believing he would never have to say to anyone. I was wrong. Teach me what I don't understand. Neither of them knew yet that within the week, the fate of the entire base would come down to whether a proud old commander could learn to listen, and whether a quiet young captain, carrying the weight of 11 soldiers she couldn't save, could bring herself to trust a chain of command one more time. Neither of them knew that the fight in the circle, the thing everyone was still talking about, the throw and the salute, and the 3 defeats in 90 seconds, would turn out to be the smallest and least important thing that happened between them. They only knew that the ground had shifted, that the certainties were gone, that 2 people who had started the week as enemies were about to be bound together by something far larger than pride, and that the outcome would depend entirely on whether they could figure out how to see each other clearly before it was too late. The cold morning stretched out over Fort Liberty. 300 soldiers went about their duties carrying a story. A major sat alone with his shame and his questions, and a quiet captain settled into her chair, opened her laptop and pulled up the security logs one more time, her eyes moving carefully down the columns, searching patient, certain waiting for the 3rd data point that would tell her that the thing she feared was real. She found it 40 minutes later, and everything, all of it, began to move. The 3rd data point was worse than she'd feared. Olivia sat very still in front of her laptop, the cold coffee forgotten at her elbow, and read the line one more time to be sure she wasn't imagining it. Another access attempt. Same strange hour, same narrow window when the base changed shifts and no one was watching the doors closely. But this one wasn't just probing. This one had reached deeper into a directory that had no business being touched from an outside terminal, and it had gone straight for the one file that mattered most on the entire installation. The master schedule for the largest training exercise of the year. She didn't move for a long moment, because this was the exact feeling she knew better than any other feeling in the world. The cold, quiet certainty of seeing a thing that no one else was ready to see. She had felt it before, in another life, in a place she never talked about, at a cost that had followed her into every room she'd walked into since. And she had promised herself, standing over 11 flag-draped boxes she would never forget, that if she ever felt it again, she would not stay quiet no matter what it cost her, no matter who laughed. She printed the logs, she gathered her folder, and she walked down the hall toward the office of the last man on the base who should have been willing to listen to her. Major Hayes looked up when she knocked. There was something different in his face this morning, something worn and unsteady, and for 1 second, she almost didn't recognize the man who had grabbed her uniform in front of 300 soldiers. "Captain," he said. His voice was careful. "I was going to come find you." "Sir, I need 10 minutes. "Bennett, listen. About yesterday. With respect, sir, yesterday doesn't matter right now." She set the printed logs on his desk and turned them to face him. "This matters." He looked down at these pages. Rows of numbers, timestamps, access codes. To most officers on the base, it would have looked like noise, like the ordinary churn of a large military network doing what large military networks do. Hayes stared at it, and his jaw tightened, and she could see him deciding whether to be insulted. "You want to explain what I'm looking at," he said. "Someone has attempted to access secure systems on this base 4 times in the last 2 weeks," she said. "Every single attempt happened during shift change, between 11:51 and 12:06, every one. That's a 6-minute window, sir, and whoever this is has hit it 4 times out of 4. Coincidence. 4 out of 4 isn't a coincidence. It's a study. Somebody learned our rhythm. They know exactly when this base stops paying attention, and they've been walking through that gap like it's a front door." She put her finger on the last line. "And last night they didn't just knock. They reached for the exercise schedule, the full operational plan. 12,000 soldiers, live movements, live logistics, real timing across 3 days." Major Hayes was quiet for a moment. Then he pushed the pages back across the desk toward her. "It flagged nothing," he said. "Security flagged nothing. You know how many access events happen on a base this size every single day? Thousands. You found four you don't like and drew a straight line through them because that's what you do. You read patterns into things. That's exactly what I do, sir. She didn't back away. And the last time I did it, I was right and nobody listened and it cost us. Something flickered in his eyes. Cost you what? She didn't answer that. She wasn't ready to not yet not to him. She just held his gaze until he looked away first. Bennett, he said, rubbing a hand across his face. I owe you an apology for yesterday, a real one. I'm man enough to know that now. But an apology doesn't mean I'm going to tear apart the biggest exercise in a decade because you found some timestamps you don't like. Do you have any idea what it would take to change that plan? The people I'd have to answer to. The reputation I'd be putting on the line. 26 years. Captain, 26 years I've built. I know what it would cost you, sir. Then you understand why I need more than a hunch. It's not a hunch. Her voice stayed level, but there was steel underneath it now. But you're right, you need more. So give me until tonight and I'll get you more. He studied her for a long moment. Tonight, he said finally. And Bennett, if you're wrong about this, you don't just embarrass yourself. You embarrassed me right after I stood in front of everybody and got put on my back 3 times by you. People are already talking. You understand the position you are putting us both in? I understand it completely, sir. She gathered her logs. That's why I hope I'm wrong. And she walked out, leaving Major Hayes alone with a printout he didn't want to believe and a feeling in his gut he couldn't shake. She spent the rest of that day building the case the way she built everything, quietly, methodically, alone. She pulled the shift rosters. She cross-referenced the access attempts against personnel movements. She mapped the strange incidents that everyone else had filed away as unrelated nuisances. A supply truck that had been rerouted by an order no one could trace. A camera near the ammunition point that had gone dark for exactly 11 minutes, then come back on like nothing had happened. A visitor badge issued to a contractor who, when she called the company, had never been sent. Each one was nothing by itself. A shrug, a clerical error, a bad day for the electronics. That was how they always looked, the small wrong things, right up until the moment they became the big wrong thing. By late afternoon, she had them all laid out on the wall of the empty conference room, connected by thin lines of red string, and when she stepped back and looked at the whole picture together for the first time, she felt the floor drop out from under her. Because it wasn't random. It had never been random. Every incident, every access attempt, every rerouted truck and blinded camera was oriented toward one thing: the exercise, the dates, the movements. Someone wasn't trying to break into Fort Liberty. Someone was learning it patiently, piece by piece, so that when 12,000 soldiers moved into position for the largest coordinated training operation of the year, they could reach into that machine and change something. A time, a route, a location. One small alteration in a plan that big, and soldiers who thought they were running a drill could end up somewhere they were never supposed to be. Sergeant Reed found her there at 7 that evening, standing alone in front of the wall. They said you'd been in here all day, he said. Then he saw the wall, and he stopped talking. Marcus, she said. She didn't look away from the red string. How well do you know the base security schedule? Well enough. Why? Because I need someone I trust to tell me I'm not losing my mind. He came and stood beside her, and he looked at it the way she had looked at it, and she watched his face change the same way hers had. First confusion, then focus, then something colder as the shape of it revealed itself to him too. That's the exercise, he said slowly. Everything points at the exercise. Everything points at the exercise. He was quiet for a long moment. Captain, he said, you need to take this to the major, right now. I already did, this morning. He needs more. Reed turned to look at her, and there was something in his eyes she hadn't expected. More than this. He's got 26 years on the line, Marcus. He got put on his back in front of everyone yesterday. If he backs a young captain's theory and it turns out to be nothing, he's finished. He knows it. I know it. She finally turned away from the wall. I don't blame him, but I'm running out of time to convince him. How much time? The exercise starts in 4 days. Reed exhaled slowly. Then we better make him believe. That word we landed on her harder than she expected. She had spent her whole career alone, deliberately protectively, because being alone meant that when the world refused to listen, only she paid the price. She had learned to prefer it that way. And here was a man she'd thrown into the dirt 2 days ago, standing beside her wall of red string, saying, "We like." It was the most obvious thing in the world. "Careful, Sergeant," she said quietly. "You hit yourself to me, and I'm wrong. You go down too." Reed almost smiled. "Captain, I've seen you fight. I've watched you read a room, and I just watched you build this." He nodded at the wall. "I'll take my chances being wrong with you over being right with anybody else." She didn't have anything to say to that, so she just nodded once and turned back to the work. They took it to Major Hayes together that night at 9 o'clock. He came to the conference room because Reed asked him to, and Olivia could see the resistance in every line of his body as he walked in the resistance of a man who had already half decided this was going to be a waste of his time and his reputation. And then he saw the wall. He stopped in the doorway. He didn't say anything for almost a full minute. He walked to the wall slowly, and his eyes moved across it the way an old soldier's eyes move, taking in the whole terrain before committing to any single feature. She watched him find the access logs. She watched him find the rerouted truck. She watched him find the blinded camera and the phantom contractor. And she watched the exact moment his eyes traced all those red strings inward and found the thing they all pointed at: the exercise. His face went pale. When he said, his voice had changed completely. The dismissiveness was gone. What was left was something older and harder and much more afraid. "When did you connect all this?" "Today, sir." "And you're certain?" "I'm certain there's a pattern. I'm certain it points at the exercise. What I'm not certain of is who or exactly what they're going to change or when they'll do it." She stepped up beside him. "But I know they've been rehearsing, and people don't rehearse for nothing." Major Hayes stood in front of that wall for a long time, and Olivia watched 26 years of certainty wrestle with something it had never had to face before. This was the moment. She knew it, Reed knew it. Everything came down to whether the proudest man on the base could do the one thing his pride had never allowed him to do. "Listen, sir," she said gently, "you told me this morning you needed more." He turned and looked at her, and for the first time since she'd arrived at Fort Liberty, Major Danielle Hayes looked at her not as a threat, not as an insult to everything he believed, but as an officer, as someone who might be right. "How many people know about this wall?" he asked. "3, sir. You, me, and Sergeant Reed." "Keep it that way." He was already moving now, already thinking, and she recognized the shift, the way a good soldier stops arguing with a fact once he decides to accept it. If somebody set this up, they had access. That means it could be one of ours. Could be somebody in this chain of command. We don't know who we can trust. So from this second, we trust nobody outside this room. Understood? "Understood, sir," Reed said. Olivia felt something loosen in her chest that had been clenched for 2 weeks. He believed her. Against his own interest, against his own pride, against everything he'd built, he believed her. And then he did the thing that would haunt them both. "I'll pull the exercise," he said. "First thing tomorrow. I'll go up the chain. I'll tell them we have a credible security concern, and I'll get it postponed while we run this down." "Sir," Olivia's voice sharpened, "you can't." He turned. "What do you mean I can't? You just spent all day proving to me that if you postpone it, they'll know. Whoever this is has been watching our rhythm for 2 weeks. The second the exercise moves, they'll know somebody saw the pattern. They'll go quiet. They'll pull back. And we'll have lost the only thing we've got going for us, which is that right now they think nobody's watching." She stepped toward him. "We don't want them to stop, sir. We want to catch them. And the only way to catch them is to let them believe everything is going exactly according to plan." The room went silent. Major Hayes stared at her, and she could see him understanding it, and she could see him hating it. "You want me," he said slowly, "to run the largest exercise of the year with 12,000 soldiers, knowing that somebody's inside our system, and just wait for them to make their move." "Yes, sir." "That's insane. That's the only way this works. If we're too slow, if we miss the window, if that one alteration goes through before we catch it, then soldiers get hurt." "I know." Her voice dropped and something raw came into it that neither man had heard from her before. "Believe me, sir, I know exactly what it looks like when you're right too late. I've seen it. I've stood in front of it. And I will do anything to make sure I never stand in front of it again." Major Hayes looked at her for a long moment. "That thing in your file," he said quietly, "the part they sealed. This is it, isn't it? This is what made you." She didn't answer. Bennett, if we're going to do this together, I need to understand who I'm doing it with. You're asking me to bet 12,000 lives on your read. I've earned the right to know where that read came from. And Olivia Bennett, who had not told the story to anyone in 3 years, who had built her entire quiet life on the promise never to speak of it, looked at the wall of red string and then at the two men who were about to risk everything on her, and she decided that they deserved the truth. 4 years ago, she said, I was an intelligence officer attached to a forward unit overseas. My job was to read patterns, movement, communications, the small things, the wrong things. Her voice was steady, but it was the steadiness of someone holding something heavy very carefully. And about 6 weeks in, I started seeing a pattern. Small at first, 2 things, then 3. A shift in local traffic, a change in the timing of certain communications, the same kind of thing that's up on that wall right now. And I knew, the way I know now. I knew an attack was coming, and I knew roughly where, and I knew roughly when. You warned them, Hayes said. I warned them. I wrote it up. I briefed my commander. I told him everything. She swallowed. And he told me I was reading patterns into noise. He told me I didn't have enough. He told me that a young intelligence officer with a theory wasn't going to regroup an entire operation. He needed more. Reed had gone completely still. I pushed, Olivia said. I pushed as hard as a captain can push a full colonel, which is not very hard at all. I brought him more. I brought him everything I could find, and every time it wasn't enough because it never is until it's too late. Her jaw tightened. The attack came 4 days after my first warning, right when I said, 11 soldiers didn't come home. 11, I had their names before I ever had their faces because I'd been the one begging someone to move them and nobody would. The conference room was silent. They sealed the records, she went on, because of what I saw and how I saw it and because of what happened after the parts I still can't talk about. They gave me a choice. I could stay in that world doing that work, or I could disappear into a different kind of career and never speak of it again. I chose to disappear. I told myself I was done being right too late. She looked up at both of them. And then I got here and I opened a security log and I saw 2 data points during a shift change and I felt it start all over again. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Major Hayes did something Olivia would remember for the rest of her life. He walked over to her and he stood in front of her and he came to attention and he saluted her. The same salute she had given him in the dirt. Held it. Waited. Captain Bennett, he said, I stood in front of 300 soldiers and told them you weren't a real officer. I put my hands on you. I tried to break you to prove a point about strength that I clearly never understood in the first place. His voice was rough. You are the best officer I have ever served with, and I would be honored to run this operation at your side. She returned the salute, and her hand was not quite steady. Then let's catch them, sir, she said. They went to work that night and did not stop. Over the next 3 days, the 3 of them built a trap inside the machinery of the exercise, and they built it in total secrecy because they still did not know who they could trust. Olivia designed the whole thing around a single principle. If someone was going to alter the plan, they would have to do it through the system, and if they did it through the system, they would leave a trace and she would be watching the exact place that trace would appear. She set up a shadow monitor, a quiet parallel watch on the master schedule that no one but the 3 of them knew existed. If a single time changed, a single route shifted, a single coordinate moved without proper authorization, she would see it the instant it happened. Major Hayes handled the rest. He walked through those 3 days as if nothing at all was wrong. He briefed the exercise. He shook hands. He gave the same tired speeches he always gave about soldiers who bleed and officers who read books. He was, Olivia realized, an extraordinary actor when he needed to be, and it occurred to her that maybe the hard shell he showed the world had always been partly that. A performance. A wall built to protect something underneath that he never let anyone see. But the strain was showing on him, and only she could see it because only she was looking. On the second night, she found him alone in his office at 2 a.m. staring at nothing. You should sleep, sir. Can't. He didn't look up. 12,000 soldiers, Bennett. 12,000. Kids, most of them. Younger than you. And I'm sending them into a machine I know somebody's tampered with, and I'm just going to watch and wait. He finally looked at her. If we're wrong about waiting, If we should have shut it down, if something happens because I trusted your plan instead of my instinct to protect them right now. Sir, she sat down across from him. Can I tell you something my colonel never understood? Go ahead. The instinct to protect them right now feels like courage, but sometimes it's just fear wearing courage's uniform. Shutting it down would feel safe. It would feel like doing something, but it would let them get away, and then next time we wouldn't see it coming, and next time it might not be an exercise. She held his eyes. The hard thing, the truly brave thing, is to stay calm when everything in you is screaming to act, to wait for the right moment instead of the comfortable one. You've been brave your whole life, sir, but I don't think anyone ever asked you to be brave by holding still. Major Hayes looked at her for a long time. How old are you again? He said finally. 31, sir. He shook his head slowly. 31. He almost laughed. I've got boots older than your career, and you just taught me something about courage I should have learned 20 years ago. The morning of the exercise came clear and cold. 12,000 soldiers moved into position across the vast training complex, a coordinated dance of vehicles and units, and timelines that had taken months to plan. From the outside, it was flawless. A demonstration of everything the modern army could do. And in a small locked room that only 3 people knew about, Olivia Bennett sat in front of her shadow monitor with a cup of coffee going cold at her elbow, watching the master schedule waiting. Reed stood by the door. Hayes paced. The first hour passed, nothing. The second hour, nothing. Maybe they're not going to do it, Reed said quietly. Maybe they got spooked. Maybe they saw something. They didn't get spooked. Olivia didn't look away from the screen. They spent 2 weeks learning our rhythm. They're not going to waste it. They're waiting for the same thing they always wait for, the moment we stop paying attention. She checked the time. Shift change is at 11:51. That's their window. That's always been their window. That's when they'll move. Hayes stopped pacing. You're sure? I'm sure of the pattern, sir. 4 out of 4. They're creatures of habit. Everybody is, whether they know it or not. That's the whole secret. Nobody thinks they have a rhythm right up until somebody who's actually paying attention shows them theirs. 11:45 came. The room went silent. Olivia leaned toward the screen. Hayes came and stood behind her chair. Reed left the door and crossed to her other side. 3 people staring at a schedule, waiting for 6 minutes that would decide whether 12,000 soldiers went home safe or something none of them wanted to name. 11:50 came. 11:51. Shift change. The window opened. Nothing happened. 11:52. Nothing. Come on, Hayes breathed. Come on. 11:53. And then a single line on the master schedule flickered. Olivia felt every muscle in her body go still. There, she whispered. It was one movement order, one unit, a route change buried inside a dozen legitimate adjustments happening all across the exercise at that same moment. Exactly the kind of ordinary chaos a shift change produces, exactly the noise they'd been counting on to hide inside. A single company of soldiers, 300 of them, rerouted from their planned position to a new coordinate on the far edge of the training complex. Is that it? Hayes was leaning over her shoulder now. Is that the one? Hold on. Her fingers flew across the keys. It's authenticated. It's got a valid authorization code. On paper, it looks completely legitimate. She pulled up the destination. But look where they're sending them. She put the new coordinate on the map, and Major Hayes made a sound she had never heard from him before. A low, sick, involuntary sound. Because the coordinate they'd rerouted that company of 300 soldiers to was the live fire impact zone. The one part of the entire complex where at 1200 hours, another element of the exercise was scheduled to bring real ordnance down onto an empty patch of ground. Except in 9 minutes, it wouldn't be empty. In 9 minutes, if that route change stood, 300 soldiers would walk directly into the place where the shells were going to fall. They're not stealing anything, Olivia said, and her voice had gone very quiet and very cold. They never were. They're not trying to embarrass us or steal our secrets. They're trying to kill 300 of our own soldiers and make it look like our mistake. The room seemed to tilt. Whose authorization code is that? Hayes demanded. Who signed off on that route? Olivia traced it. Her fingers moved. And when the name came up on the screen, all 3 of them stared at it, and the bottom fell out of everything. Because the authorization code belonged to Major Daniel Hayes. They had used his name, his credentials, his authority. Whoever this was, they had reached into the system, taken the identity of the exercise commander himself, and used it to send 300 soldiers to their deaths. So that when it was over, when the shells had fallen and the bodies were counted, there would be exactly one person to blame. Him. That's not possible, Hayes whispered. I never signed that. I never touched that order. I know you didn't, sir. Olivia was already moving, already thinking 3 steps ahead. But that's what the record will say. That's the whole design, 300 dead soldiers and your signature on the order that killed them. They didn't just want a massacre, they wanted a name to hang it on. And they picked yours. The clock on the wall read 11:56, 8 minutes. Then we stop it, Hayes said, lunging for the door. I'll call it in. I'll halt the exercise. Sir, stop. Olivia's voice cracked across the room like a whip, and he froze. You call it in on an open channel, and whoever did this knows in 10 seconds that we saw it. They've got a valid order with your name on it. Yours. If you start screaming to halt the exercise, and it's your code on the movement, who do you think they're going to detain first? You. They'll pull you into a room to sort it out, and while they're sorting it out, that company keeps walking, and the clock keeps running, and we lose the only 8 minutes we have. Hayes stood frozen at the door, and she watched the horror of it wash over him. She was right. He knew she was right. The trap wasn't just built for the soldiers. It was built for him. Every move his instincts screamed at him to make was a move that would slow him down, tangle him up, and let the clock run out. Then what, he said. Bennett, what do we do? We've got 8 minutes. Olivia was already on her feet, and for 1 second, one single second, the calm she wore like armor cracked, and Major Hayes saw underneath it, and what he saw was not fear. It was a promise made 3 years ago over 11 flag-draped boxes coming due at last. We don't stop the exercise, she said. We can't. There's no time and no clean way to do it. She grabbed her jacket. We go get them ourselves, that company, 300 soldiers walking toward that impact zone right now. We physically reach them and we turn them around before the shells fall, and we do it in the next 8 minutes, the 3 of us, and we don't ask permission from a system that's already been turned against us. Reed was already at the door. That impact zone is 4 miles from here. Then we'd better drive fast, Sergeant. She was moving now out the door, down the hall, Hayes and Reed a step behind her. Sir, I need every fast vehicle you can put your hands on without going through a channel. Reed, I need you on the radio the second we're close enough to raise that company, directly unit to unit, no chain, no code. Just a human voice telling 300 soldiers to stop walking. And I need both of you to understand something. She stopped at the door to the outside, one hand on the bar, and turned to look at them. Whoever built this is watching that schedule too, she said. The moment we move, the moment that route change gets reversed, they'll know we saw it. And they will not just give up. This was months of work. 300 lives and a commander's career all set up to fall in one afternoon. People who plan like that always have a second move. So even after we save those soldiers, and we are going to save those soldiers, this doesn't end. It just changes. Are you both with me? Reed didn't hesitate. All the way, Captain. And Major Danielle Hayes, 26 years in the Army, 4 combat deployments. The man who 2 days ago had slammed her against a Humvee and told her there was nobody here to protect her, looked at the quiet captain who was about to run 4 miles into a live fire zone to save 300 soldiers who would never know how close they came. And he understood finally and completely everything he had gotten wrong about strength. Lead the way, Captain, he said. I'm right behind you. The clock read 11:57, 7 minutes, and the 3 of them ran. They hit the motor pool at a dead run, and Hayes was shouting before they'd even reached it. Sergeant Alvarez, 2 vehicles, keys in them now, don't ask. There was a young motor sergeant standing by the fuel point, and to his eternal credit, he took one look at the major's face and did not ask a single question. He tossed the keys. Reed caught them out of the air, and 11 seconds later, 2 tactical vehicles tore out of the motor pool with Olivia behind the wheel of the first one, Hayes beside her, and Reed following close behind, and the clock in Olivia's head read 11:58, 6 minutes. Talk to me about the terrain, she said, both hands locked on the wheel, taking the perimeter road at a speed the vehicle was not designed for. 4 miles, you said. Is it 4 miles of road or 4 miles as the crow flies? Road's longer. Hayes had a map open across his knees, his finger tracing frantically. Road loops all the way around the training area. If we stay on pavement, we're looking at closer to 6 miles. We won't make it. Then we don't stay on pavement. Bennett, show me the straight line. His finger stopped. There. He tapped the map. You cut across the old vehicle trail, here past the range control tower. Straight through that low ground, you come out on the west edge of the impact zone. That's your 4 miles. But that trail's not maintained. It's washed out in 3 places, and I don't know if it'll hold. She was already turning the wheel, taking the vehicle off the road and onto the rutted dirt track, and the whole frame shuddered as they hit the rougher ground. Reed, you copy? We're going cross-country. Stay on my line. Copy, Reed's voice crackled back. Right behind you. The vehicle slammed through a washout, went airborne for a sickening half-second, and came down hard, and Hayes grabbed the handhold above the door and held on. You're going to break an axle, he said. Then we run the rest on foot, but we're not slowing down. She didn't take her eyes off the trail. Sir, I need you to do the math for me. Right now, out loud. When does that live fire element start putting rounds into that zone? Hayes checked the exercise timeline, and she heard him do the calculation, and she heard the exact moment the number frightened him. 1,200 hours, he said. Sharp. That's their scheduled time on target. They fire at noon. And it's 11:59 now. It's 11:59 now. 1 minute of margin, maybe less. She pushed the vehicle harder. Reed, she said into the radio, forcing her voice steady. How close do we have to be before you can raise that company direct? Line of sight or close to it. Couple thousand meters, maybe less, depending on the antenna. I can't reach them from here. There's a ridge in the way. Then the second we clear that ridge, you start calling. You don't wait for me. You don't wait for anybody. You get a human voice into that company, and you tell them to halt in place. Understood? Understood. The vehicle crested a low rise, and for the first time the impact zone came into view in the distance, a wide expanse of open ground shimmering in the cold light, and somewhere out there moving across it was a company of 300 soldiers who had no idea they were walking into the place where the shells were going to fall. And Olivia's heart nearly stopped, because they were closer to the zone than she'd hoped. Much closer. The false order had a head start. Those soldiers had been walking toward that coordinate for 6 minutes already, following a movement order that carried as far as they knew the full authority of their command. They were disciplined. They were doing exactly what they'd been told. And their discipline was going to kill them. They're already inside the danger area, Hayes said, and his voice was hollow. Bennett, they're already in it. Then we get them out. Reed, now call them. Nesheza. Reed's voice came over the net hard and clear, broadcasting in the blind on the exercise frequency. Any station, this net, any station, this net. This is a priority safety message. All elements. Vicinity grid checkpoint. 7, halt in place, cease movement immediately. This is not a drill. Static. Nothing came back. They're not answering, Reed said. Either they can't hear me or somebody's told them to expect exactly this, Olivia said, and the cold understanding of it settled into her like a stone. Think about it. If you built this trap, you'd know a warning might come. So you'd tell that company in advance. You'd say during the exercise you may hear a false safety call trying to stop your movement, disregard it. It's part of the scenario, part of the stress test. You'd inoculate them against the very thing that could save them. Hayes stared at her. That's monstrous. That's thorough. She yanked the wheel around a washout, which means a radio call isn't going to be enough. They've been trained to ignore the radio call. We have to physically reach them. We have to put a body in front of them that they cannot ignore. The clock read 1,200 hours. Noon. And in the distance, from somewhere far off to the north, came a sound that turned Olivia's blood to ice. The flat rolling crack of the first fire mission, stepping off. Not into the impact zone yet. The first rounds always walked in adjusting before they fired for effect. But it had started. The shells were in the air. The clock had run out. They're firing, Hayes said. Oh God, they're firing. Adjusting rounds, Olivia said, and she was praying she was right. First rounds are always ranging. They'll spot, they'll correct, then they'll fire for effect. That's our margin. That's the only margin we have. 90 seconds, maybe. Reed, break off, take the north approach, get between that company and the gun line. If you have to do whatever you have to do to be visible, I'm going straight in. Straight in where? Into the impact zone. Captain, you can't drive into a live impact area. Watch me. She drove into it. She took the vehicle over the last rise and down into the open ground where the shells were going to fall. And Major Hayes, a man who had done 4 combat tours and buried more friends than he could count, gripped the door and understood that he was watching the single bravest thing he had ever seen in his life. Because she wasn't doing it blind. That was the thing that undid him. She wasn't reckless. She'd calculated the ranging pattern, she'd read the gun line's likely correction, she'd figured the seconds, and she was placing herself in this vehicle in the one lane she believed the fire for effect would spare, and she was betting all their lives on a piece of pattern reading she'd done in her head at 80 miles an hour. "There," Hayes shouted, pointing. "There they are." The company, 300 soldiers spread in a long movement formation, walking with the patient discipline of troops who trusted their orders straight into the heart of the impact zone. Olivia drove directly across their front sideways to their line of march and slammed the vehicle to a stop dead in their path. Broadside, an immovable object 300 soldiers could not walk around and could not ignore. She was out of the door before it stopped rocking. She climbed onto the hood, and she did the one thing that no radio call could be trained away, the one thing that cut straight through discipline and doctrine and every false order they'd been fed. She stood up in the middle of a live-fire impact zone in full view of 300 soldiers, and she screamed at them with everything she had. "Stop! Stop where you are! This is a live impact zone. You are walking into a fire mission. Halt! Now turn around, move west. Move west, go, go, go." For one horrible second, nothing happened. 300 faces turned toward the woman standing on the hood of a vehicle in the middle of the impact area, and she saw the confusion, the hesitation, the trained instinct to keep following the order they'd been given. And then the company commander, a young captain, near the front, looked past Olivia out toward the gun line and saw what she was pointing at, and his face changed. "Contact rear! Cease movement! Everybody west, move, move, move!" He bellowed, and 300 soldiers broke and ran west away from the impact zone exactly as the second sound came rolling across the open ground. The correction, the fire for effect. Olivia dove off the hood and into the vehicle as the first rounds of the real mission came down, where the company had been standing 40 seconds earlier, and the ground itself seemed to jump. And Hayes had the vehicle moving before she'd even closed the door, tearing west after the running soldiers, and the shells walked across the empty ground behind them right through the space where 300 lives had been about to end. Nobody died, not one. The rounds fell on empty dirt exactly where the trap had wanted 300 soldiers to be, and there was no one there to receive them, because a quiet captain had read a pattern in a security log 2 weeks earlier and refused this time to be right too late. They regrouped a mile west out of the danger area in the lee of a low ridge, and for a moment nobody said anything at all. 300 soldiers stood in the cold, breathing hard, slowly understanding how close they had come, and mostly not understanding it at all, because you can't really understand a thing like that in the first minute after it doesn't happen to you. The young company commander walked up to Olivia, and his hands were shaking. "Ma'am," he said. "Captain, that order to move to checkpoint 7. It came down through channels. It had authorization. I was told I was specifically briefed that during the exercise, there might be a false safety call, and to disregard it." His voice cracked. "If you hadn't put that truck in front of us, if you hadn't stood up where we could see you, I'd have kept walking. I'd have walked my whole company right into it, and I'd have thought I was doing my job." "You were doing your job," Olivia said quietly. "You did exactly what a good officer does. You trusted your orders, and you protected your soldiers. The failure wasn't yours. Somebody used your discipline as a weapon against you. That's the oldest trick there is, and it is not your fault that it almost worked." The young captain looked like he might come apart, and then he pulled himself together the way soldiers do, and he saluted her long and slow, and with everything he had. She returned it. And Major Hayes, standing beside the vehicle, watched all of it, and something in his chest that had been breaking loose for 3 days finally broke all the way free. But there was no time to feel it, because Reed came running up from the north, and his face was wrong. "Captain," he said. "Major, we got a problem. A big one." "What is it?" "I got close enough to the gun line to see the fire direction center," Reed said, still catching his breath. "The people running the mission. They're legit. Real soldiers, real crew doing exactly what they were told. They fired on that grid because the grid came down to them as a cleared, authorized target. Somebody told the guns that impact area was cold and clear at noon. Somebody authorized both ends. The movement order that put the company in and the fire mission that came down on top of them. He looked at Hayes. Sir, this wasn't one bad actor slipping a route change into the system. This was coordinated. Somebody moved the men in and called the fire down at the same time. This took two hands, at least two. The clock in Olivia's head reset and started running towards something new. He's right, she said slowly. I've been thinking about this wrong. I've been looking for a single intruder, one person working the seams during shift change. But you can't do this alone. She turned it over fast, the pieces rearranging. One person alters the movement order using the major's stolen credentials, but somebody else has to make sure the fire mission fires on a schedule on that exact grid with no last-minute safety check. Those are two different systems, two different points of access, two different people. She looked at Hayes. Sir, there's more than one of them, and at least one of them isn't outside the wire at all. At least one of them is one of ours. The word landed on Major Hayes like a physical blow. One of ours, he repeated. It has to be. An outsider can steal credentials. An outsider can slip through the shift change. But an outsider can't make sure a live fire mission goes hot on schedule with the safety observers looking the other way. That takes someone on the inside, someone with authority, someone that no one on that gun line would question. Her voice dropped. Someone who was standing close enough to this whole operation to know exactly how it worked. Hayes went pale. That's my staff. You're describing Bennett. That's my inner circle. You're telling me one of the people I trust most on this base just tried to murder 300 soldiers and pin it on me. I'm telling you, the pattern says that's exactly what happened. For a moment, Hayes looked like he might argue, might defend his people, might retreat into the loyalty that had defined his whole career. And then he thought about his own credentials on that movement order, his own name attached to the killing blow, and he understood that the same person who was willing to slaughter 300 soldiers had been perfectly willing to end him too, and that loyalty had already been betrayed by someone he'd have trusted with his life. Who? He said very quietly. Who on my staff had access to both the movement system and the fire authorization? Olivia was already thinking. How many people, sir? How many on your staff could touch both? Hayes closed his eyes and went through it. Operations officer, fire support coordinator, my executive officer. He opened his eyes. Three. 3 people had the access to reach both ends of this. Then it's one of those 3. She started moving toward the vehicle. And they're about to have a very bad afternoon because their trap just failed. And a failed trap is the most dangerous thing in the world. Sir, listen to me. Whoever this is, just watch 300 soldiers walk out of that impact zone alive. They know it failed. They know somebody saw it coming. And right now they're doing the same math we are, and they're realizing that the only way this doesn't come back on them is to make sure it comes back on you instead. Fast, before anyone can investigate. Meaning what? Meaning your name is on that order. The evidence still points at you. And the cleanest way for them to walk away clean is to make sure you get detained for it before you can prove you didn't do it. She got behind the wheel. They're going to come for you, sir, officially, legally, with that movement order in their hand and your credentials all over it. And when they do, they are going to separate you from the one person who can actually untangle this. You, me. She started the engine. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to get back to that base before they can move on you, and we're going to secure the evidence that proves your credentials were spoofed, and we're going to do it before whoever this is realizes we're already 3 steps ahead of them. She looked at him. But I need to know right now, sir, those 3 people, operations, fire support, and your XO, is there anything at all that makes one of them stand out? A grudge, a reason. Something that never sat right. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. And Olivia watched him, not want to answer, watched 26 years of trust fight against the cold arithmetic of what had just happened. There's one thing, he said finally, and I hate myself for even thinking it. Say it. My XO, Major Foster, 6 months ago he was up for a command, a good one, career-making, and I wrote the evaluation that cost him the job. Hayes's jaw tightened. I didn't think he was ready. I said so. Honestly, in writing the way I've always done it. He took it hard, harder than I understood at the time. He told me in my office that I'd ended his career over a personal opinion and that a man's 20 years shouldn't come down to one commander's read of him. Hayes looked at her, and the color had drained from his face. He said, and I swear I thought it was just anger. He said, one day you're going to know what it feels like to have everything you built taken away by somebody else's mistake. The vehicle went silent. Everything you built, Olivia repeated slowly, taken away by somebody else's mistake. She felt the whole design of it click into place, cold and complete. Sir, that's not just a suspect. That's a motive. 300 dead soldiers and your name on the order that killed them. Everything you built gone in one afternoon over a mistake that wasn't even yours. He wasn't trying to kill 300 soldiers. She met his eyes. He was trying to destroy you. The soldiers were just the weapon he chose to do it with. Hayes looked like he was going to be sick. That can't be Foster, he said, but there was no conviction in it. I've known that man for 4 years. I've had dinner at his house. I know his wife. His kids call me Uncle. I understand, sir. I do. Olivia's voice softened, but only slightly. But I need you to hold two things in your head at the same time because they're both true and they're going to feel like they can't be. You can love someone and know them for years and eat at their table, and they can still be the person who did this. Betrayal doesn't come from strangers, sir. Strangers don't have the access. Betrayal always comes from inside the circle. That's what makes it betrayal. The clock in her head was running again, and she put the vehicle in gear. We have maybe 20 minutes before he realizes his trap failed and moves to protect himself, she said. Maybe less. We need to get back, and we need to secure the credential logs that prove your signature was forged before Major Foster gets to them first and makes them disappear. Because if he erases the proof that you were framed, then it stops being his word against ours. She looked at Hayes one last time before she hit the gas. It becomes 300 soldiers who almost died in official movement order with your name on it and no evidence at all that you didn't do it. And in that world, sir, you don't retire with honor. You go to prison, and the man who tried to murder 300 of your soldiers pins on his eagles and takes your command. Major Hayes stared straight ahead, and when he spoke, his voice was the voice of a man who has finally fully understood the shape of the thing that is trying to destroy him. Then drive, Captain, he has said. Drive like their lives depend on it. They do, sir. She floored it. They always did. And the vehicle tore back east toward the base, 3 miles of open ground between them and the evidence. And somewhere ahead of them, a man in a clean uniform with 20 years of service and a wound that had festered into something monstrous was beginning to understand that his perfect plan had failed, and that the only person who could have unraveled it was a quiet captain he'd never once thought to fear. The clock read 12:14, and the race for the truth was on. They made it back to the base in 11 minutes, and Olivia knew the moment she saw the operations building that they were already too late for the easy version of this. There were 2 military police vehicles parked outside, waiting. He moved fast, she said, slowing the vehicle before they reached the lot, pulling it into the shadow of the maintenance shed. Faster than I thought. That's not a coincidence, sir. Those aren't there for anybody but you. Hayes stared at the MP vehicles, and she watched the reality of it hit him. 26 years, and now there were military police waiting to take him in on his own base. Foster called them, he said quietly. He's already made his move. He's reported the movement order. My credentials. He's turned me in for what he did. Which means he thinks the evidence still points at you, and he wants you contained before you can prove otherwise. She killed the engine. Sir, once they detain you, everything changes. You lose access, you lose your credentials, your terminal, your ability to move freely on this base. And Foster gets exactly what he needs, which is time. Time to go into that system and the acting commander and clean up every trace that points at him. She turned to face him. We can't let them take you before we secure the proof. Then what do we do? Run? I'm not running from my own MP's Bennett. That makes me look guilty, and guilty is exactly what he needs me to look. No, sir. We don't run. Her mind was moving fast now, calculating the way it always did when everything was on the line. You're right. If you run, you hand him the story. So we don't run. We split. She pointed at Reed. Marcus, you're with the major. Sir, you go in there and you let them do their job. You go quietly. You cooperate completely. You don't argue, you don't fight, you don't say a single word about Foster. Hayes's jaw dropped. You want me to just let them arrest me? I want you to buy me time. She held his eyes. Every minute you're calm and cooperative is a minute Foster relaxes. He thinks the dangerous one is you. He's watching you. He set this whole thing up to destroy you, so his eyes are on you. Nobody in this entire scenario is watching me, sir. Nobody ever watches me. That's been true my whole life, and today it's the only advantage we have. She was already unbuckling. While they process you, while Foster's congratulating himself, I'm going to get into the credential logs and pull the proof that your signature was spoofed. And he won't see me coming because as far as Major Foster knows, I'm just the quiet captain who reads too many reports. Hayes looked at her for a long moment, and she could see how much it cost him, this idea of surrendering, of trusting the whole weight of his fate to a woman he'd known for less than 2 weeks. If this goes wrong, he said, I lose everything. My rank, my freedom, my name, everything I've built. I know, sir. And I'm supposed to just hand it to you, hand all of it to you and hope. You're not handing it to me. She opened the door. You're trusting me. There's a difference. And I know, sir, believe me, I know exactly how much I'm asking. The last time somebody had a chance to trust my read and refused, 11 soldiers died. Her voice didn't shake, but something underneath it did. I've spent 3 years wishing that Colonel had trusted me. Now you get to be the man who did. Don't waste it being afraid. Major Hayes looked at her one more second. Then he did the hardest thing he had ever done. He got out of the vehicle, straightened his uniform, and walked toward the MPs with his hands visible and his head high, and he let them take him calmly without a word of protest, exactly as she'd asked. The clock in Olivia's head read 12:29. She went in the back. She knew this building better than anyone realized because she'd spent 9 days when everyone thought she was hiding, actually learning every hallway, every terminal, every camera, and every blind spot, the way she'd learned every base she'd ever been posted to. It was habit, it was survival. And now it was the only thing standing between Major Hayes and a prison cell. She reached her office without being seen, sat down at her terminal, and got to work. The credential logs were exactly where she knew they'd be, and they told the story she'd expected, but there was a problem, and she saw it immediately. The logs showed Major Hayes' credentials authorizing the movement order at 11:53. Clean, authenticated. On the surface, it looked exactly like the Major had signed his own soldier's death warrant. Whoever had done this was good. There was no obvious forgery, no crude tampering, nothing a casual look would catch. But Olivia Bennett had never once in her life given anything a casual look. She dug deeper. Under the surface, authorization in the raw system data that almost no one ever bothered to read every credential used left a second signature. A machine signature. The specific terminal, the specific session, the specific physical location where the credentials had actually been entered. And that was the thing a forger almost always forgot because it lived so far down in the system that you had to know it was there to think, to erase it. She pulled the machine signature for the movement order, and her heart began to pound. Because Major Hayes' credentials had authorized that order, yes, but they hadn't been entered from Major Hayes' terminal. They'd been entered from a terminal in the fire support cell, and the session had been opened 4 minutes earlier by a different login entirely before switching over to Hayes' stolen credentials. She traced the original login. The name came up on the screen, and even though she'd known, even though the pattern had told her, seeing it in cold data still made her breath catch. Major James Foster. There it was. The proof. Foster had logged into that terminal under his own name at 11:49, then used Hayes' spoofed credentials to push the movement order at 11:53 from the fire support cell, the one place with access to both the movement system and the guns. He'd left his fingerprint at the scene of the crime because he'd never imagined anyone would look this deep. Why would they? The surface story was perfect. Hayes' credentials, Hayes' name, Hayes' ruin. She had him. She started copying the data, everything, the machine signatures, the session logs, the original login, building a package no investigation could ignore. And she was halfway through when she heard the door open behind her. "You know," said a calm voice, "I always wondered what you were really doing in all those reports." She turned. Major James Foster stood in the doorway. Clean uniform, easy posture. The face of a man everyone trusted, a man whose kids called Hayes Uncle, a man who had just tried to murder 300 soldiers and frame his commander for it. He was looking at her screen, and he was smiling, and there was nothing behind the smile at all. "Major Foster," Olivia said. She did not move. Her hand stayed near the keyboard, and she kept her voice level. "You're up. I'd have thought you'd be busy. Acting commander's a lot of paperwork. Nobody's told me I'm acting commander yet." He stepped into the office and closed the door behind him. "But we both know it's coming. Poor Dan, 26 years, and it ends with 300 soldiers he almost killed with his own signature." He tilted his head. "Except they didn't die, did they? Somebody stopped it. And I've spent the last 20 minutes trying to figure out who could possibly have seen it coming." His eyes went to her, and here you are, digging through credential logs. The quiet one, the one nobody watches. "You should have kept it that way," she said. "Yeah," he nodded slowly. "I'm starting to see that." He took another step. "How much do you have?" "Enough." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer you're getting." She still hadn't moved, but every muscle in her body had gone quietly ready. "You logged in under your own name at 11:49. Fire support cell. Then you used the major's spoofed credentials to push the movement order 4 minutes later. You left the machine signature. You left the session log. You left your own login sitting right on top of the whole thing because you never once thought anybody would dig deep enough to find it." She watched his face. "You were thorough on the surface and lazy underneath, Major. That's the mistake of a man who's used to nobody checking his work." For the first time, the smile flickered. "You're bluffing. I'm looking at your login on this screen right now." She didn't blink. "James Foster, 11:49. You want to come read it yourself?" And that was when the calm left his face completely, and Olivia saw the real man underneath the one the wound had made, and it was worse than she'd expected. Because it wasn't rage. Rage she could have handled. It was grief. Twisted, festering, 4-year-old grief, the grief of a man who had built his whole life around a career and watched one evaluation take it away, and who had decided that if his life was going to be destroyed, he would take the man who destroyed it down with him and never mind who else had to burn. "He ended me," Foster said quietly. "You understand that one evaluation, one page. 20 years of my life, and Dan Hayes decided in one afternoon that I wasn't good enough, and that was it. That was all it took. Command gone. Career gone, everything I'd worked for gone because of one man's opinion." His voice cracked. "You know what he said to me when I asked him to reconsider? He said he was just being honest. Honest. Like his honesty didn't cost me my entire future." "So you decided to cost him his?" "I decided to show him," Foster said, "what it feels like. To have everything you built taken away by somebody else's mistake. That's all I wanted, for him to feel it. Just once. By murdering 300 soldiers." Olivia's voice was very quiet and very hard. "Kids, most of them. Younger than me. Soldiers who trusted their orders, who did everything right, who would have walked into that impact zone and died because you needed one man to feel bad about his career. That's not justice, Major. That's not even revenge. That's just you deciding your pain was worth more than 300 lives." "Don't," Foster said. "Don't you lecture me. You don't know what he took from me." "I know exactly what he took from you." She stood up slowly. "He took a command, a job, a promotion. And I understand that it broke something in you, I do. But you know what you were about to take. You were about to take 300 mothers' sons, 300 people who never wrote your evaluation, who never even knew your name. And you were going to spend their lives to settle a score with one man." She shook her head. "You didn't want justice. You wanted permission to stop caring who got hurt. And there is no wound in the world big enough to earn you that." The room was silent, and Olivia watched Foster's hand move toward his side, and she understood with cold clarity that this had just become something else entirely. "You have the data," Foster said, and his voice had gone flat and dead. "So the data doesn't leave this room, and neither do you. Major, think about what you're doing. I've already killed my career today. What's one more thing?" He took a step toward her. "You're the only one who's put it together. The Major's in custody. Reed doesn't have the technical read. It's just you, Captain. Just the quiet one nobody was watching. If you're gone and this data's gone, then it's my word as acting commander against a dead captain and a disgraced major." His hand closed around the grip at his side. I'm sorry, I really am, but I've come too far to lose it all to you. And Olivia Bennett, who had defeated a mountain of a combat instructor in 9 seconds, who had put a battalion commander on his back 3 times in 90, looked at the man reaching for a weapon in a closed room, and she did the thing she always did. She stayed calm. Major Foster, she said, before you finish drawing that, I want you to know 2 things. You don't get to negotiate. I'm not negotiating. Her voice was steady as still water. I'm warning you, the same way I warned Major Hayes on the field right before I put him on the ground 3 times. And you're going to do exactly what he did. You're going to think you understand this situation, and you're going to be wrong. She hadn't moved, but she was ready now, completely every part of her. First thing, that data's already gone. I finished copying it before you walked in. It's not on this terminal anymore. Killing me doesn't kill the evidence. It just adds my body to the list of things you have to explain. Foster's hand froze. You're lying. Am I? She let a small silence hang there. You want to bet your last chance on it? You've been wrong about who was watching you all day. You sure you want to be wrong about this too? And in the half-second of doubt that crossed his face, the half-second his eyes flicked to the terminal to check Olivia moved. She'd been reading him the whole time. His balance, his breathing, the exact moment his weight would shift when his attention split. It was the same thing she'd read in Sergeant Reed on that cold morning that felt like a lifetime ago. The same thing she'd read in Major Hayes, the same thing she'd been reading in people her entire life. Foster committed his focus to the screen for 1 instant, and in that instant, his weapon hand was distracted, and his balance was wrong, and Olivia crossed the space between them faster than he could react. She didn't fight his strength. She never did. She took the wrist of his weapon hand and turned it the way it did not want to go, and she used his own forward momentum against him, and she put Major James Foster face down on the floor of her office, with his arm locked behind him and the weapon spinning away across the tile, but in less time than it takes to describe it. He struggled. She held him calm, controlled, applying exactly enough pressure and not 1 ounce more. Stop fighting, Major, she said quietly. It's over. It was over the moment I found your login. Everything since then has just been you making it worse. You don't understand, Foster gasped into the floor. You don't know what it's like to lose everything, to have it taken away. I know exactly what it's like, Olivia said, and for the first time all day, her calm cracked just slightly, just enough for him to hear what was underneath it. I lost 11 soldiers because a man like Hayes didn't listen to me. I've spent 3 years carrying their names. I know what it is to have everything taken away by somebody else's choice. She tightened the lock just enough. And I never once thought the answer was to make somebody else's soldiers pay for it. That's the difference between us, Major. That's the whole difference. We both got broken. I just refused to break anyone else on my way down. The door burst open. Reed came through it firsthand on his own weapon, and behind him, to Olivia's shock, was Major Hayes uncuffed with 2 MPs flanking him, and an expression of pure disbelief on his face at the sight of his executive officer of 4 years pinned to the floor by the quiet captain he'd tried to destroy. Sir, Olivia said, not letting go of Foster. I thought they had you in custody. They did. Hayes' voice was rough. For about 10 minutes. Then Reed showed them the wall, the red string, everything. And it turns out MPs are pretty good at their jobs when somebody hands them the actual evidence. He stared down at Foster. James, God, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't. Foster went still, and then muffled against the floor, he started to laugh. And it was the worst sound Olivia had ever heard, the laugh of a man who had lost everything twice. You wrote that I wasn't ready, Dan, he said. Remember, you wrote it down. You put it in my file. 1 page. His voice broke. 1 page and everything I built was gone. Hayes stood there, and Olivia watched 26 years of a friendship die in his face. I wrote that you weren't ready, Hayes said slowly, because you weren't. And I was honest about it because I thought you deserved honesty. I never once imagined it would lead to this. He crouched down close to Foster's face. You had a home here, James. Your kids call me uncle. And you were going to let 300 soldiers die and let them lock me away for it and eat dinner at my table the whole time. His voice was barely a whisper. You didn't lose everything 4 years ago. You're losing it right now, and you're doing it to yourself. The MPs took Foster then. They cuffed him, read him his rights, and lifted him off the floor, and Olivia finally let go and stepped back, and only then did she realize her hands were shaking just slightly, the way they always did after in the moment when the calm finally let go and let the rest of it through. They walked Foster out. He didn't say another word, and the office was suddenly very quiet, just the three of them, Olivia and Hayes and Reed standing in the wreckage of a plan that had almost worked and a friendship that hadn't survived. "How?" Hayes said finally. "How did you find it?" "The proof. I gave you maybe 20 minutes and you found something a whole investigation might have missed. The machine signature." She sat down heavily in her chair. Everybody erases the surface. Nobody thinks about the layer underneath the raw record of which physical terminal actually entered the credentials. Foster forged your signature perfectly. He just did it from the wrong room and he never thought anyone would check. She looked up at him. He was thorough where people look and lazy where they don't. Most people are. That's usually how you catch them. Hayes stared at her for a long moment. Then he pulled a chair over and sat down across from her close, and he spoke quietly just to her. "You could have run," he said, "when you saw the MPS. You could have decided this wasn't your fight. You'd been at this base 13 days. I put my hands on you in front of 300 soldiers. Nobody would have blamed you for walking away and letting me sort out my own mess." He shook his head. "Instead, you sent me in to be arrested so you could clear my name. You bet everything on that. Why, Habwashime?" Olivia was quiet for a moment. "Because 11 soldiers died once because a commander didn't trust the person who saw the truth," she said finally. "And I promised myself I'd never be on the other side of that. I'd never be the one who saw it and let it happen. Not to 300 soldiers, and not to you." She met his eyes. "You were wrong about me, sir. Badly wrong. You humiliated me in front of your whole command. But when it counted, when I brought you that wall and asked you to bet your career on my read, you listened. You were the commander that Colonel never was. And a man who's willing to listen when it costs him everything is a man worth saving." Major Hayes looked at her, and this hard, proud 26-year soldier who never let anyone see underneath let her see just for a second. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it. The things I said, the things I did. I looked at you and I saw everything I'd decided to hate about the modern army, and I never once bothered to find out who you actually were." His voice was thick. "You saved 300 of my soldiers today. You saved my name. You saved my whole life, Captain, and I spent our first 2 weeks trying to break you. I don't know how a man says he's sorry for something that big." "You just did, sir." The clock on the wall read 12:51. Less than an hour had passed since the shells fell on empty ground, and Olivia Bennett sat in her small office with a battalion commander who had become in the space of a single terrible morning something she'd stopped believing she would ever have again. Not a superior, not a threat, something rarer and harder to name. Someone who had trusted her raid when it cost him everything and been right to. Outside the window, 300 soldiers who would never fully understand how close they'd come were being accounted for one by one, every single one of them alive. Somewhere in a holding cell, a broken man was beginning the long reckoning with what his grief had almost done. And in a sealed file that Major Hayes could not open in a career, the Army had gone to great lengths to hide there was finally at last a line that would never be sealed and never be forgotten. She had seen it coming, and this time someone had listened, and this time nobody died. The investigation lasted 3 weeks, and for the first few days, Olivia wasn't sure Major Hayes was going to survive it. Because that was the thing nobody tells you about being framed. Even after the truth comes out, even after the real culprit is in a cell, the damage doesn't just vanish. The movement order still had Hayes' name on it. The record still showed his credentials authorizing 300 soldiers into a live fire zone. And when the investigators arrived from higher command, they didn't arrive knowing Foster was guilty. They arrived knowing that on the day of the largest exercise of the year, an entire company nearly died, and the paper trail pointed straight at the battalion commander. "They're going to interview me tomorrow," Hayes told her on the third night, standing in the door of her office. He'd taken to coming by in the evenings. He didn't always say much. Sometimes he just needed to be near the one person who'd believed him. "And I've got no idea what they've decided. Foster's version had a head start. Even with your data, even with the machine signatures, there's a chance they look at all of it and decide the simplest story is the true one." He rubbed his face. "The simplest story is that I did it. The simplest story is almost never the true one, sir, Olivia said. It's just the one that takes the least effort to believe. That's supposed to comfort me. No, it's supposed to prepare you. She turned in her chair to face him fully. Tomorrow they're going to try to shake you. They're going to lay the movement order in front of you with your name on it, and they're going to watch your face. And every instinct you have is going to tell you to get angry, to defend yourself, to pound the table and tell them how many years you've served. She held his eyes. Don't. That's the wrong move. That's the move of a guilty man protecting himself. Do the thing you've spent 26 years being too proud to do, sir. Stay calm, tell the truth, and let the evidence do the fighting. Hayes almost smiled. You're telling me to fight like you fight. I'm telling you the calmest person in the room is almost always the one telling the truth. Guilty men shout. Innocent men can afford to be quiet. She turned back to her terminal. You've got the machine signatures. You've got Foster's login. You've got a wall of red string I built 2 weeks before any of this happened. Timestamp that proves I saw the pattern before there was anyone to frame. You don't need to win the interview, sir. You just need to not lose it. Let me win it for you in the data the way I already have. The interview went the way she said it would. They laid the movement order in front of him. They watched his face. And Major Hayes, a man who had spent his entire career unable to sit still, while someone questioned his integrity, sat perfectly still and told them the truth in a calm, level voice, and pointed them again and again to the evidence Olivia had built. The machine signatures, the fire support terminal, Foster's login at 11:49, the shadow monitor, the wall. And on the fourth day, the investigating officer, a full colonel with 30 years and eyes that had seen every kind of lie, called Olivia into the room alone. Captain Bennett, he said, sit. She sat. He had her file open in front of him, or the part of it he could see, which wasn't much. She watched him look at the sealed sections, watched him understand what they meant, watched him decide how to handle a junior officer whose record he didn't have the clearance to read. I've been doing this a long time, he said finally, and I've never seen anything like what you built. A serving officer framed for the deaths of 300 soldiers, and the only thing standing between him and a court-martial was a captain who'd been on his base for 13 days. A captain he tried to humiliate in front of his whole command. The colonel leaned back. You could have let him hang. Nobody would have questioned it. Frankly, most people would have. I'm aware, sir. So why didn't you? Olivia was quiet for a moment. Because I've been on the other side of it, sir, she said. I've been the officer who saw the truth and couldn't make anyone believe her. I know what it costs when the system decides the simple story is good enough. 11 people paid that cost once on my watch because nobody would listen. She met his eyes. I wasn't about to let it happen again just because the man in the crosshairs had been unkind to me. Kindness isn't the price of the truth, sir. The truth is owed to people, whether they've earned it or not. The colonel studied her for a long moment. Then he closed her file, the sealed and the unsealed both, and he did something that surprised her. He stood up and he came around the desk and he offered her his hand. I don't know who you were before you got here, Captain, he said. Your file won't tell me, and I've got a feeling I wouldn't have the clearance to understand it if it did. But I know who you are now, and the United States Army is lucky to have you. He shook her hand. Major Hayes is cleared, fully. I signed it an hour ago. I just wanted to meet the person who saved him first. Olivia found Hayes outside, and she didn't have to say anything. He read it on her face, and something in his shoulders let go 26 years of weight, easing all at once. And this hard old soldier, who never showed anyone anything, had to turn away for a moment and look at nothing until he could trust his own voice. Cleared, he said finally. Fully, sir, an hour ago. Hayes nodded slowly, and when he turned back, his eyes were wet, and he didn't bother to hide it. 13 days, he said. You were on my base 13 days before all this started, and you saved everything I have. My soldiers, my name, my career, my freedom. He shook his head. I keep trying to find the words captain, and there aren't any big enough. You don't need big words, sir. She almost smiled. You listened when it counted. That's the only word that matters. The story of what happened at Fort Liberty spread across the base the way these things do, but not the way Olivia expected. She'd braced for attention, for questions, for the whispers to come back louder this time. And some of that came, But mostly what came was something else, something she hadn't been ready for. Respect. The real kind. The kind that doesn't need to be spoken. Soldiers who had laughed at her name 2 weeks earlier now came to attention a half-second sharper when she passed. The young company commander, whose 300 soldiers she'd saved, came to her office alone and stood in the door for a long moment before he could get the words out. And when he did, they were simple. "Thank you for my soldiers, ma'am. Thank you for letting me take them home." She told him he'd earned that himself by being the kind of officer who turned his company around the instant he understood the danger. But she could see it had changed him, the knowledge of how close it had come, and she recognized the look because she'd worn it herself for 3 years. And then one morning, Major Hayes did the thing that Olivia would carry with her for the rest of her life. He called a formation, the same field, the same 300 soldiers who had watched him grab her uniform and slam her against the Humvee and tell her there was nobody there to protect her. He stood them all in their rows in the cold exactly as he had that first terrible morning, and he called Captain Olivia Bennett to the front. She came and she stood where she'd stood before, and for one strange moment, the whole thing felt like it was happening again. The same cold, the same silence, the same 300 faces. But everything was different now. 2 weeks ago, Major Hayes said, and his voice carried across the field the way it always did, "I stood on this exact spot and I did something I will regret for the rest of my life." He didn't soften it. He didn't dress it up. "I looked at this officer and I decided I knew who she was. I decided she was everything wrong with the Army. Soft, untested, a paper officer who'd never faced anything real. I put my hands on her. I humiliated her in front of all of you. And I did it because I was so certain, so proud of my own certainty that I never once stopped to ask whether I might be wrong." The field was silent. 300 soldiers did not move. "I was wrong," Hayes said. "I was as wrong as a man can be. And 13 days later, this officer, the one I humiliated on this field, saw a threat that no one else on this base could see. She built the case alone when nobody would listen, the same way she's had to her entire career. And when the day came, she drove into a live fire impact zone on foot and stood up where 300 soldiers could see her, and she turned them around 40 seconds before the shells came down." His voice caught and he let it. "Every soldier in that company is alive today because of her. And when the man who did it tried to frame me for it when I was in handcuffs on my own base, she cleared my name. She saved my life, and she did it for a man who gave her every reason not to." He turned to face her fully. "I told you all 2 weeks ago that a rank doesn't make you a leader," he said. "I was right about that. I was just wrong about who the leader was. It was never me. It was the quiet one I tried to break." And then in front of 300 soldiers, Major Daniel Hayes came to attention, and he saluted Captain Olivia Bennett, and he held it. "Captain Bennett, I'm sorry. In front of everyone who watched me wrong you, I am sorry, and it is the honor of my career to serve with you." Olivia returned the salute, and then she did something no one expected. She turned to face the 300 soldiers, and she spoke, and her quiet voice carried farther than any shout. "The Major has nothing to apologize for that I haven't already forgiven," she said, "because he did the one thing that actually matters. When it counted, when I brought him something impossible to believe and asked him to risk everything on it, he listened. That's rarer than courage. That's rarer than strength. Most people, when the truth is inconvenient, find a reason not to hear it. He heard it, and 300 of you are alive because of it." She let that sit for a moment. "I want to tell you all something because I think you've earned it," she said. "A uniform doesn't make you a leader. A rank doesn't make you brave. And being the biggest, the loudest, or the most certain person in the room doesn't make you right. I've spent my whole career being the quiet one that people underestimate. And I've learned that the person nobody's watching is often the one who sees the whole battlefield most clearly. Not because they're smarter, because they're paying attention when everybody else has stopped." She looked across their faces one by one. "Leadership isn't proven when everyone believes in you. It's proven in the moments when nobody does and you do the right thing anyway. Remember that, every one of you, because one day it's going to be you who sees the thing nobody else believes. And on that day, I hope to God you have a commander like this one who's willing to listen." 300 soldiers stood in the cold and nobody moved and nobody spoke. And Olivia understood that she had just given them something they would carry for the rest of their lives. The truth about Major Foster came out slowly in the weeks that followed, the way these things do. He confessed in the end. Not out of remorse at first, but because the evidence was so complete there was nothing left to deny. And in his confession, the full shape of it emerged, and it was sadder than anyone expected. 4 years of a wound he never let anyone see. A career he'd built his entire identity around, taken by a single honest evaluation. A grief that curdled slowly in the dark into something that could look 300 soldiers in the face and decide their lives were an acceptable price for one man's pain. Hayes went to see him. Once. Olivia never asked what was said, and Hayes never told her, but he came back from that visit quieter than she'd ever seen him, and he stood in the door of her office for a long time before he spoke. "He wasn't always like that," Hayes said finally. "I keep thinking about it. The man who did this and the man I knew for 4 years, they're the same person, and I can't make them fit together." He looked at her. "How do you do it, Bennett? How do you hold that knowing that people you trust can become that?" Olivia thought about it for a long moment. "You don't hold it by pretending it can't happen," she said. "You hold it by understanding that everyone's carrying something and pain doesn't excuse what people do with it, but it explains it. Foster was in pain. Real pain. That part was true." Her voice went quiet. "The lie was believing his pain gave him the right to create it in other people. That's the line, sir. Everybody hurts. Not everybody decides to make 300 other people hurt to feel better about it. The pain isn't the sin, what you do with it is." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "That colonel 4 years ago," he said carefully. "The one who wouldn't listen, who cost you 11 soldiers." He watched her face. "You could have become Foster. Somebody took everything from you too. Somebody's mistake cost you more than an evaluation ever cost him. You had every reason in the world to go bitter." "I know," Olivia said quietly. "So why didn't you?" She was silent for a long time. "Because I saw their faces," she said finally. "The 11. At the ceremony, I saw their families, their mothers. A little girl, maybe 6, holding a folded flag she was too young to understand. Her voice didn't shake, but it slowed, each word carrying weight. And I made a choice standing there. I could spend the rest of my life angry at the man who didn't listen. Or I could spend it making sure I was always the one who did. One of those honors the 11, the other just adds to the pile." She looked up at him. "Foster chose the anger. I chose the 11. That's the whole difference between us, sir. It was always a choice. It was never anything else." Major Hayes looked at her, and for the first time he understood fully what the sealed file had been protecting. Not a secret mission. Not a classified operation. A wound. The same kind of wound that had destroyed Foster, carried by a woman who had made the opposite choice with it every single day, quietly for 3 years, and never once asked anyone to know. The months went by the way they do. Olivia stayed at Fort Liberty. She could have gone anywhere after that, could have let the story open doors, could have finally stepped out of the shadows she'd lived in for so long. But she stayed because the work was there, and the soldiers were there, and because for the first time in years, she was somewhere that people saw her clearly and let her be exactly what she was. And Major Hayes became, to the surprise of everyone who'd known him for years, her strongest advocate. The hard old commander who'd believed the Army was going soft, who'd trusted nothing but muscle and experience, became the loudest voice in the room whenever anyone questioned a young officer's read, whenever anyone dismissed the quiet one who saw a pattern nobody else could see. He'd learned the lesson the hard way, and he never stopped teaching it. The two of them, who had started as enemies on a cold field in front of 300 soldiers, became something the Army rarely produces and never forgets. Partners. The commander who finally learned to listen, and the officer who finally found someone worth trusting. Between them, they made that battalion into something better than either of them could have made alone, because he brought the years and she brought the eyes. And together, they never once in all the time that followed missed the thing that mattered. Years later, long after Olivia had moved on, long after Hayes had retired, soldiers who'd been at Fort Liberty that season would still tell the story. They'd tell it to new recruits who thought strength was about being the biggest and the loudest. They'd tell it the way you tell a thing that changed you. And they'd always end it the same way, with the lesson those 300 soldiers carried off that field and never put down. The quietest person in the room may be the one who sees the whole battlefield most clearly. The strongest person in the fight may be the one who chooses not to strike. And real leadership is never proven when the whole world believes in you. It's proven in the cold, lonely moment when nobody does, and you stand up anyway and you do the right thing, and you refuse to let the people who depend on you pay for the world's failure to listen. Captain Olivia Bennett had lived that truth her entire life. She lived it on a cold morning in front of 300 soldiers who laughed at her name. She lived it in a levying fire impact zone with 40 seconds on the clock. She lived it in a closed office with a broken man reaching for a weapon. And she lived it every single day, quietly carrying 11 names she would never forget, choosing the 11 over the anger again and again and again. She never needed anyone to know how strong she was. She only needed to be there watching when everyone else had stopped, so that when the day came that nobody believed the truth, there would be one person left who did. And that in the end is the strongest thing a person can be.